Well, that's why concept 2 though has advantages over concept 3.
Yes,
And also it faces south.
yes, yes.
I understand Dr. prefers
Yes.
direction.
And I think, you know, what Carl's suggesting is kind of a hybrid. You know,
Yeah.
it's kind of a, it seems to be leaning more towards concept 2, I would say, but with, it's kind of a variation.
Right.
Well, and partially I'm just thinking of the breakdowns that you were giving of what would be on each floor. And if we're going to have paired services, then perhaps the corner becomes the transition point between them
That's exactly
rather
right.
than a barrier to combining them.
No, that's exactly right. That's why I say I think it's something that you really need to explore by developing the floor plan to really test it and know whether it works well.
Sure. Don, by having the building on option 2
Yeah.
there away from the church, does that take away the overpowering height of the building compared to the church, do you think? So if we do 3 stories and it's higher,
Yeah, so you're
Oh, it's
referring
set back
to,
far
you're
enough.
referring to the church here on the
Right.
corner, Greg?
Yes.
On Lockport
Yeah.
Street. yeah.
Right, so I think the nearest any building is, in what we're proposing, is putting an addition on the end of the existing building, and that's
Yeah.
still a considerable distance away. I mean,
Okay.
the existing building, I think, would still be a pretty good transition between the church and the new 3-story building that would be added.
Okay.
Yeah.
yeah.
I think it would be much more of a problem, obviously, if we propose to tear this down and put this block right here.
Okay.
You know, kind
All
of butting right
three of
up to
these
the-
schemes assume we're gonna keep the library open and on this site.
Yeah, which makes
To
a lot
put
of
the
sense.
building down at the south end of
Yeah.
the site, we'd have to relocate the library.
Right.
Yeah,
And we were trying to avoid the expense of that.
absolutely. And that can be significant.
It all depends on how much available cheap open space there is in the community.
Yeah, true.
Okay, so I'll go through, excuse me, I'll go through the greenfield site concepts now, and I think one of the major decisions to make on this site is that it's a lot of land area. You only need a portion of it. I mean, one of the big decisions is what portion of it makes the most sense for the library. So what you see outlined here, this kind of green colored area, represents the entire greenfield site. The city has already kind of laid out an industrial park lot configuration at the north end of the site. So you have the industrial park up here, which is really adjacent to some other industrial zoning that's here. You have some multifamily residential directly across the street, located down here. You have the water treatment facility over here. This is zoned, the parcel to the south is zoned B5. We talked to the city engineer because one of the things we wanted to find out is in this big greenfield site, are there any areas where you have, low areas that might be a concern for water ponding, things like that. I said, no, not really on this site, but south of it you do. So I think, this lot that's zone B5, I think probably has some challenges when it comes to developing it because of the.
I see questions forming, so I'm going to give a little context here. This site is actually owned by the Village of Plainfield. It was originally purchased for a future train station for the Star Line that never materialized, and now Metra, et cetera, has said that that is not going to happen basically in any of our lifetimes. So the village is looking at what to do. It's 58 acres total. They have an interested party for that proposed future industrial park. That's something they've already kind of got in the works. So this is, other than that, they pretty much said, if you want some, we can.
So it's up near 143rd then?
Yes,
Yeah.
and actually, I think it's the I-1, the little purple, whoops, go back. The little purple sticky outy part,
Right.
the purple triangle is
Right.
Jim Quest.
Oh, okay.
So this is actually at the corner of Wood Farm Road.
Okay.
So where Wood
Gotcha.
Farm comes up and hangs a left, that's the corner where they have the proposed library location.
So
where
off that
curve is.
direction is Van Dyke and the post office and all that, if you know. Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and you've talked about a couple of other kind of features around the site. One is there are 2 train lines. There's the main train line that comes here, kind of a spur that comes down here. This train line has a fair amount of activity, this one very little. There's one access road that comes through the site right now, which gets you over the water treatment facility plant, and that's it. So there really are no roads that kind of go through here. So your site access to this site is there's really one way to get to that site, off of that road. And the Jim Quest site would have been a really interesting site for the library. You don't get many opportunities like that when you get to build out on a corner like that. I mean, that would have been a really interesting site, I think, for the library. But given the fact that it's where it is and, some of the other conditions around it, we're suggesting that the best place to locate the library is in this southwest corner of the site here. So you have a presence on the road, which I think is really important. Get you, some distance from the water treatment facility plant, some distance from the proposed, future industrial park. The thing we're unsure of, while this is zoned R1, if this is an industrial park here, what's going to happen, with this in the future? Who's going to be your neighbor, so to speak, in the future as things go on? So, for the sake of our discussion tonight, we're recommending that we locate the library in the southwest corner of this site. So if you have other ideas about it or questions about it, let us know. So here's a site plan that shows that overall configuration. Up in the drawing on the left here, up on top, you can see the way they're proposing this industrial park. And one of the things that they're proposing within that is some kind of road that would come out, kind of go through the rest of the site and connect back up to Southwood Farm Road over here. And I think part of the reason for that is so that they can develop the interior of the site. They have access to it on the interior as well.
What kind of traffic would we think about using?
It's really going to depend on what they put
Kind
there.
of.
Yeah.
That's-
And so we don't know.
I know,
We
but
don't
that's
know.
what I'm.
No.
Yeah, it could be heavily trucks, or it
Yes.
could be residential.
Right.
Because they said there wasn't a lot of traffic right now on the water treatment.
No,
road
there
to
isn't
get back
at all.
there, that's infrequent.
Right.
So we don't have to worry about that, but once they develop the rest of the area, we're not sure.
Depending on what goes in.
Yeah.
So we're showing 2 ways of orienting the building on this corner site that we proposed down here. One is in the east-west direction, the other is in the north-south direction. And I think that one of the reasons that the east-west direction is interesting, if you think about the amount of traffic that's traveling north and south along this side, and you think about, I think one of the challenges out here in a kind of remote site like this is how do you give the library some presence, some identity. And I think one of the things that appeals to us about the idea of locating the building in the east-west direction is you get a kind of broad face, so to speak, that can be seen from those roads traveling north and south. As opposed to the other one where you orient the building north-south and it kind of faces the street, so to speak. So when you're driving by it on the street, you kind of see the front entry, right? But as you're traveling north-south, you're just going to be seeing kind of the end of the building. So I think, if you decide to go with this site, I think we're not saying that we should settle on one or the other of these tonight. I think these are some preliminary considerations that we've identified, but I think we'd have to develop it and see where it leads a little bit more. So in both cases, you can also see that road, that interior road that I was talking about, right, and how that will connect to the industrial park and also provide, as it goes back out to Southwood Farm Road, how it provides access into the library parking lot. Okay, and so in one case, we have the parking's in front of the building in both cases, in one case off the road here. In another case here, in this case, we kind of intentionally sent this back. The idea being that maybe you get a kind of, foreground, lawn space in front of your building, a nice green space in front of your building, so it's not just parking that's right on the street.
That was one of the suggestions they had, that you shared parking with the gym and just extended it.
Not with the location that we're
In their option
suggesting,
where they-
in their options they did, but our
Yes,
location
that's
is
what I'm
not
saying.
south of it.
Yes. Yeah, so in the cities, in what we got from the city, they were proposing locating your building directly behind Jim Quest. And we didn't think that was such a good idea. Bury your
Across the
building
street there?
Right, and we go back to the,
They have the parking and then.
Oh, no, not across the street.
So what they were
Yeah, the
proposing,
side
here's
parking.
Jim Plus, is just put it back here,
Okay.
right behind it. And we thought you're better off to have your own street presence, you know, out here instead of being kind of buried behind that building. Okay, so, you know, the plan configurations are very similar in this building.
right, so, you know, obviously in this greenfield space, we don't have any really site constraints, so to speak. So we basically split the building 50-50 essentially, that it's a two-story building. We would have enough space on the first floor to get, you know, the amenities of a library that are typically seen on the first floor, the meeting rooms, the youth services, as well as circulation entry. We also were identifying the staff areas that could be on this floor as technical services, network services, and maintenance. Then the second floor would be for young adults, adult services, popular service libraries, popular library services, and referenced and nonfiction services. So we're able to, you know, get the split that's really maybe more desirable because of a two-story configuration, and because the site is, you know, 58 acres and we're only using a small portion of it.
Right, yeah, I think, you know, right now we're showing a long bar building here.
It can be shaped.
This might be
Yeah.
one where the L-shaped configuration makes a lot of sense, just so you're not dealing with big, long faces like that. So I think, you know, something like that would make sense to look at as we go forward. But I think whenever you have a library building with this kind of long proportion like this, and one of the reasons that we like to do that instead of making it, say, more of a square, so to speak, is that, imagine you have windows along here. The ability, when you're inside the building, to be near daylight is much easier when you keep a kind of limited depth on the building, so to speak. So a big square box doesn't work so well, because you get the interiors where you're really far from daylight. But one of the things that happens when you orient the building like this is that where you locate the entry becomes really important. So, you know, we don't want to locate the entry down on one end in a case like this, because of the amount of distance you have to go to get to the other end. So typically in a building like this, the entry is going to be more or less in the center, so that when you get into the building and you're moving around inside the building, you're never having to go that far, you know, once you get inside the building. So if you imagine a case like that, where you come in near the center of the building, you might imagine you turn one way and you have youth services, you turn the other way and you have the meeting rooms, for example, on the first floor in a case like this.
And that longer, shorter bar is representative of this
Yes.
plan, so to speak. So you can see just kind of the relationship of the volume compared to the other shapes that we've put up there.
So while we don't have any site constraints that are limiting us to a certain square footage and a certain height as we go up, we also don't want to make the first floor so big that it's, you know, it's unnavigable, so to speak, you know, as you get inside. So, you know, 45,000 square foot footprint is a pretty good size footprint. Yeah, I'm not sure we want to go any bigger.
And yet, we're not still at that 115.
So when we developed this, we had Anders' preliminary program information, which was 90,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Now we've gotten a revised version of it, which is 100,000 square feet. So we can certainly fit the 100,000 square foot
Well, I
program.
know that.
Yeah.
I'm curious as to
And
why.
Yeah.
we are, our next meeting with Anders, as we're continuing to refine the inclusions in the building program, the next meeting is on Tuesday with the different
And that's
departments.
with department heads?
Yes, with
Yeah.
department heads and some of the departmental staff to talk about workstations and specialty areas and
Yeah.
all of those needs.
So the last image that we have is really, there really isn't much to add to this conversation here. I mean, it's just so you building and running.
I do have a question about
Yep.
that. If we are looking at a larger overall library size, and you say that 45,000 footprint is kind of pushing it a little bit, is there any advantage to actually putting a half level on it to make it a third level but not a full third? And I'm also wondering just in terms of the profile within the neighborhood, because we're going to
Yes.
be behind
Yes.
industrial and residential,
Yes.
it gets us up and over?
Yes, I think it's a very good question. I think the issue becomes one of efficiency. When you have a smaller floor plate, you still have to run a minimum of probably 2 elevators and 2 stairways up to it.
Okay.
So, you want a certain size floor plate where it makes sense. You don't want a floor plate that's so small that a large portion of it, or more than you should normally have, is taken up by commercial circulation.
Right.
So I think it's an excellent point. I think, this is a case where maybe you look at staff areas.
Right.
Maybe there's some
Administrative
other
offices,
areas,
those sorts of things.
non-public areas, so you keep all the public areas on the 2 lower floors, and you put, some other back of house areas on the floor above. So, that's really our presentation today.
Wait, one more, just the comparison.
Oh,
Just
and the
just
comparison,
the final.
sorry, okay.
That was,
So-
we just everything that we kind of already talked about.
Yeah, so this is kind of a summary of some of the things Julie Ann was talking about.
So Don, on the Greenfield site, we don't use all of the spare land. There's a lot of that land that we don't need.
Right.
But they,
Okay.
they did talk about, we don't have to, they would do shared water retention for the site, so as they develop all the site, they have to collect the water.
Mhm.
They talked about having a shared pond at some point in time, that we'd have to coordinate with them. And then the utilities have to be figured out for this
Yeah.
site too, and
Yeah.
the road,
Where they
all
are,
that kind of stuff,
yeah.
who pays for that and how you get them there.
Yeah.
How much acreage are you thinking for this?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure that I am not sure that we figured it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let us get back to you on that.
Yeah.
That's,
Okay.
it's a very easy question to answer.
It's the kind of thing we should probably leave a little room for future expansion or something too.
Sure. I just was
Not box
curious.
ourselves in.
No, and I mean, Eric raises a good point when you think about future expansion as well. Because one of the other constraints about building on your existing site is that if you wanted to expand in the future, you can only go up. Now, that's feasible. We designed the Oak Park Library, the structural systems and everything, mechanical systems, everything to add another floor in the future, should they have that need. So it's possible to do that. But, with the Greenfield site, you're gonna have much more room, obviously, to do that. Now, that being said, I think that, one of the important factors in deciding between these 2 sites should be what does it mean to the community? Really, what's best to the community? And I think the Greenfield site to us, while it gives you a lot of opportunities for how you lay out the building program and, allow for future expansion and things like that, the remoteness of it compared to your downtown location and kind of what it means to be a civic building, within the community. It's hard, this seems like a really good spot, for you to be, by comparison. So I think, that's our observation on it. I know, that there are certainly other factors to consider, in thinking about this, but I think, in the end, you're going to the community and asking them to support what it is you're doing, and I think thinking about it from their point of view, and this is something, we're outsiders coming in and kind of making this judgment based on a little bit we know right now. You're certainly in a better position than we are to, have a good opinion about that. So, but I just wanted to raise it as an important factor to consider in this. So any questions on what we've done so far? I think the last part of our presentation is just to talk about what's next. Where do we go from here? But before we go there, any questions or comments regarding what you see?
One of the things that you had mentioned about the green roof is that I would love to know, like, as soon as possible, if you're going to be talking to the zoning people in Plainfield about if they're going to be doing that, if you guys would want to talk to them. I mean, I don't know who talks to them,
No,
but I wanted a green roof anyways. Because Madison Library, when they redid theirs, did a green roof, and Madison allowed them to zone it.
You can
as
do a
stormwater
green
treatment.
roof, I
Yeah.
won't object to that, some building departments, they don't want you to count it as part of the retention system, because 20, 40 years from now, when you replace the roof, you might not put the green back on.
True, true.
So sometimes they want all the pipe size and everything, like there's no green roof, so you don't get any of the savings that you get in. But with sustainability and LEED being more prominent these days, they're starting to let you take some of those savings. You just have to commit to keeping a green roof alive
Sure.
and functioning on top of the building.
So a lot of the libraries that I looked at through the architect package that we had gotten had done that and had successfully, with their communities, had stormwater drainage counted in there, so it makes it easier
Yes.
as they're doing it on a site, like if we stay on this site,
Yep.
so.
No, and I think that the whole idea of getting in to meet with the city and talking about this issue and other issues as well. I mean, whether it's parking, whether it's how you get in and out of the site, some of those issues. It's something we'd like to do as early in the process as it makes sense. It doesn't make sense to do it when you're looking at as many concepts as we
Yeah.
have yet. So I think once we get it narrowed down, then it will make sense to go in and have those kind of conversations with the city.
And at this point, the village board's conversations have all revolved around just the idea that no matter what concept, any of these, all of these, will require working with the village, be it zoning, variances on parking parking requirements, whether we're getting a site, exchanging land, and even if we're staying on the current site, one of the things to remember is that the village actually owns this piece of the parking lot, the corner of Illinois Street that is furthest north of our parking is actually a piece that's owned by the village. While we have attached the parking lots through that TIF district funded parking improvement, they do still own the land underneath. And so in that case, it would again be some sort of land swap where they officially own this corner of the parking lot instead of that corner of the parking lot, kind of a thing. So the understanding is there that regardless of which concept is selected, we need their support and their buy-in.
Although potentially, depending on exact boundaries, we might avoid that with
We
an
might.
L shape in the corner and retain what is their parking as parking.
Yes.
So-
Either way.
You like L shape.
I do.
Yeah. He wants to make
I don't like
he wants to make the L, yeah, but,
That one.
yeah. Other than that.
That's good, see, we've learned something here tonight. Okay, any other opinions
I
about?
like that portion over toward 59, if we have room to get in and out. I like that. I like that for the people that live
That's
across
over.
the street.
Yeah. So, let me go back to the concepts that we presented on this site. And I mean, one of the ways that you start to narrow the choices is instead of trying to think about what is it we want to do, you think about what we definitely don't want to do, right? So I think, from everybody's point of view, if we don't have to add on to this building and kind of saddle yourself with the limitations that'll, come from that, unless there's some really strong financial advantage to adding on to the existing building, that probably doesn't make as much sense as building a new building on this site, because there seems to be, okay, it seems obvious, I just want to make
General
sure
agreement there,
we're on the
yes.
same page
Yeah,
there,
yes.
okay. I think the other thing I guess I would generally say is that if you have a choice between these two building orientations, that the one where we put the kind of wall of building on 59 is less desirable than the one where we orient the building in this configuration. But what might be most desirable is some combination of the two, some kind of hybrid, between the two. And I think if that seems to make sense as a direction, before we come back next time, that's one of the things that we can show you. We can give you an idea of what that would look like on the site, how that would affect the parking on the site, things like that, how that might affect, the below grade parking. I mean, this is another big issue. How do you feel about below grade parking?
I love the idea of being able to
Obviously.
provide additional parking for our side as well as for the rest of downtown.
Yep.
It's a constant issue,
Yep,
a multitude of times throughout the day, week, year.
yep.
The building down next to another block, this Plains and Lawford Street,
Yep.
they have underground parking
Yep.
under that building.
Okay,
So
good.
that's already been established.
All right, good. No, and I think, this is not something you can add on to the building in the future. You can't
Right.
put below grade parking, right? So
Hold
I
this up
think-
for a minute.
Yeah. So I think it is certainly gonna add costs, and I think that's something we can identify and see how it fits within the overall budget as we go forward. But it sounds like if we can fit it within the budget, that it would make sense to put it in the below grade parking space to do the fees. Okay?
What
Especially I
about,
like for the additional
if you didn't-
security factor for the staff as
Staff,
well.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you didn't have the parking below grade, but you had another level of library below grade, is that an option, or is that something you wouldn't like, or
Well, I think what we're trying to,
brainstorming?
I don't think they need 35,000 square feet more basement spaces.
No, but I mean, instead of having 3 stories and going up 3 stories, going up 2 and having 1 below.
well, I think what we're trying to do with the below grade parking is to increase the amount of parking.
Yeah.
That's really the goal.
So if we don't have to dig out for a building and incur that expense and build at grade,
Right.
and we think we can get the 3rd floor variance from the village, then that seems to make more sense.
Right, I think, the other thing, Graham, is that you're not gonna save any money by putting a story of finished construction below grade, instead of building it above grade. And I think just having access to the natural light and all that just makes sense to put it above.
I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, and I think,
I'm not advocating-
well, but I can see a situation where it would make sense. I mean, we're proposing a 3-story building on this site, which is gonna require the village to go along with the idea of a 3-story building on this site, right? So if we ran into a roadblock there, and we said, nope, we've got this square footage, but we're limited to 2 stories, then you're kind of forced into considering
Yeah.
the story below grade.
Okay.
What's the water table like here?
Bill, do you know?
Right here where we stand now, I don't.
I suspect it's
But we're
pretty
real
high.
close to the river,
Yeah.
In fact, there's a lot of wetland we drive through on the way in, so
It is high.
we're
Yeah.
assuming it's just
When
like most of
Naperville-
Chicago, just
when-
a
when
swamp.
Naperville
Just
cemented the
go.
whole town.
The good news here is there's a lot of gravel pits.
Gravel
This
pits,
would make a
okay.
great gravel pit, so there is,
Well, that's what it is.
but we are very close to the river.
Yeah.
I happen to own property on the other side of the waste treatment plant.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of, if you were to ask me what do I think, I'm kind of both ways right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'm a property owner and then I'm a realtor.
And I think one important consideration along the way is that when we get to the Citizens Task Force and public meeting portions of the process, that the discussion about the existing building needs to take place and about the challenges it presents for the existing site.
Yeah.
As well as the cost factor of maintaining this building, which is already X years old.
24 and counting.
Didn't we have that with the facility infrastructure assessment?
Right.
Didn't it come onto like $1.1 million over the next like 10 years? And that's not, and most of our special
and-
reserve fund is drained just keeping the roof
Yeah.
from flooding in on us.
Yeah.
We don't really have money to fix anything
And
big that
that,
might explode.
and that 1.1 or 2, whatever, $1 million was nothing cosmetic or functional. That was building
Mitigation.
systems operating only. So keeping a functional boiler, a functional roof, functional cooling system, fire panels, all those things that have to happen, front doors that actually open and close and can be locked. Nothing about, reconfiguring for 21st century services or anything to that effect.
What kind of grants are available for different parts of this building plan? I mean, are there grants?
Almost none. The,
You know,
The federal grant program for library services and technologies is all programmatic, and there used to be a pass-through bit with the state, but the state has basically use that federal funding as replacement funding for what they used to do, which is our per capita grants for public library, and that's operating money for us, that's nothing capital. The capital grants for libraries in the state of Illinois this past year was $700,000 statewide. The largest grants, and there were 2 or 3 of them, I don't remember which, was $125,000. That's the maximum.
I know we've talked about this with
Yes.
different hats on, but I thought I'd
Exactly.
bring it up anyway.
So there is not a lot
They're
of,
generally need-based,
Yeah.
so they're competitive to get them. And where this used to be $50 million a few years ago that they put out, now it's